now more than ever, the role of Parliament in restraining the power of the Prime Minister is primordial. And we will continue to carry out that role proudly on the floor of this House of Commons, because we will always remember that we are servants and not masters.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Today, the House of Commons elected a new Speaker, Liberal MP Greg Fergus. We discussed the history behind the role, and we also did a little digging into Mr. Fergus's history, too.
Before we get to that, we wanted to say a huge, huge thank you to a very special donor who wished to remain anonymous for their incredibly generous donation today. We will be using the funds to help purchase a high-definition camera that we'll be able to take to the next Million March for Children, as well as interview guests on the show. If you would like to support the channel, check out the description of this video for more details. Now let's get into it.
Order. It is my duty to inform the House that a Speaker of this House has been duly elected. Before announcing the name of the successful candidate, I wish to explain how the next few minutes will unfold.
Of the vote has been announced, I will ask that the Speaker-elect proceed to the front of the bar of the House. The Right Honourable Prime Minister and the Honourable Leader of the Opposition will then proceed to escort the new elected Speaker from there to take the chair. Et voilà le moment.
And now the big moment.
Inform the House that the Honourable il est maintenant demandé.
It is my duty to now inform the House that the Honourable Member for Hull Elmer has been elected as Speaker. Let us welcome the new Speaker of the House of Commons.
Now, you may be wondering why Trudeau and Poilievre are escorting Fergus down the aisle of the House, arm in arm like a bunch of schoolgirls. When a new Speaker of the House is elected, the successful candidate is physically dragged to the chair by the Prime Minister and the Leader of the official opposition. This custom dates back centuries to British Parliament, where the Speaker of the House would communicate the House's opinion to the King. Historically, if the King didn't agree with the message of the Speaker, well, let's just say that the King would make him a head shorter. As you can imagine, previous Speakers of the House required some coercion to accept their new role. These days, it's a theatrical throwback to a time when the Speaker's role really was a hazardous occupation.
Now they get paid, what?
Too much money?
$260,000 a year to do it. So I don't think there's much coercion in dragging these guys down to the actual throne. The other interesting thing about the process of electing a Speaker is when the election begins, or is about to begin, by default, every single member of Parliament is a candidate for the role. So you actually have to opt out instead of opting in to put yourself up for a nomination. And some of the candidates that were actually up for election this year were interesting. So there was a Conservative candidate named Chris d'Entremont. He obviously was not elected, and Elizabeth May decided to leave herself in as a candidate. So she obviously wasn't elected, because typically what's going to happen is your party is going to vote for you, and Although the Liberals don't have a majority of the House, they do have the most amount of votes. So the NDP voted for their candidate, the Conservatives voted for theirs, and the Liberals actually had two candidates, which was interesting. But our friend Greg Fergus won the day. So, yeah.
Can't say Cypher and I are actually thrilled about that.
Yeah. We'll get to that in a minute.
Alors?
Order. Honorable members, I beg to return my humble acknowledgments to the House for the great honor you have been pleased to confer upon me by choosing me to be your Speaker. Before we get started, I would just like to thank several people and all of you. First, I'd like to start with the Honorable Member for Bécancour Nicolet Sorel, the Dean of the House. This Dean of the House, who's had a long career here at the House of Commons of 39 years, he's inspiring for us all. There are young people who have just arrived in 2021 and others who have arrived recently during by-elections. And you have before you inspiration for us all. Someone who is close to their electorate, their riding, and someone who has served with great integrity since 1984. So congratulations.
So some of you may be wondering, Dean of the House, I've never heard of that before. So the Dean of the House is essentially responsible for one thing, and it's what he just did. The Dean of the House is responsible for the election of the Speaker of the House. Now, this particular Dean has actually been Dean of the House since 1984, as Greg said. So he's been around a long time. And I think at this point it's just out of respect that they keep him on as Dean. He used to be a progressive conservative member of Parliament until 1990, and then he changed to the Bloc. So where he's been a member of Parliament since. So there's a little history for you.
Perhaps you don't remember. In 1988, I came here as a parliamentary page, and I had the pleasure of serving that gentleman water and to deliver messages on paper. He was kind, upright at the time, and he still is today. He still is, even more so. And I hope that I will have the opportunity to beat your record, at least in this chair, for more than 5 days. But we'll see. We'll start with this afternoon.
I'd like to thank my honourable colleagues who stood to let their name stand to become Speaker of the House of Commons. Let us all give them a huge round of applause. They are amazing Canadians. They have served this House, especially the speakership team. The two assistant speakers and the deputy speaker in particular have served this House very well and with great honour and integrity. And I hope to continue to count on your sage advice and your support as we move forward for the rest of this Parliament.
Yeah, Greg's going to need a lot of advice. A lot. And there's a couple of reasons why we're not too thrilled that he is the new Speaker. Yes, he's a Liberal, but it was always going to be a Liberal, and we all knew that. But this individual just has an arrogance about him that we've seen in committee time and time again.
And in the House.
And in the House during question period and during debate. He is not a humble individual.
Like, I get it, your options are kind of limited because you need somebody who speaks both English and French fluently. I know a lot of MPs don't. They speak one or the other. Not many speak both languages. So that really narrows down your pool to begin with. But there's other MPs they could have picked. Like, this guy would have been last on my list.
Yeah. And, you know, this position, when they're in the House, his voice rules all, right? The Prime Minister is the leader of the country, but when everybody's in the House, it's the Speaker. That's why in French they call him Mr. President. So there's a gravitas that goes with this position, and you would hope that the person that they're electing has a very high amount of integrity. And at least when Rhoda was originally elected, he kind of carried himself that way.
You can say what you like about Rhoda. We all know what happened in the end. But overall, I'd say he was a good speaker. He wasn't always impartial. We've touched on it numerous times when we felt that he was being unfair. But, you know, I think he really respected the position, and that's important.
Yeah. And I don't think this guy is going to one bit. And there's a major reason for that. Major reason is that just a few months ago, February of 2023, Greg Fergus was actually convicted of an ethics violation. So he broke the ethics law.
And like other liberals we know who broke the ethics law, it seems like there's been no consequences.
Nope. And this guy is so special that they called the report that they wrote the Fergus Report by the current ethics commissioner at the time, Mario Dion. Now, you may be wondering, okay, so what did he do? Well, here's the summary of the report that is many, many pages. In June of 2020, Natif Incorporated applied to the CRTC for its broadcast service Natif TV to be granted mandatory distribution as part of the digital basic service across the province of Quebec. On June 2nd, 2021, Mr. Ronald Felix, a director of Natif Incorporated, requested a letter from Mr. Fergus in support of its application. According to Mr. Fergus, Mr. Felix, as a Black Canadian, approached him in part due to his role as chair of the Parliamentary Black Caucus, since the application concerned a television station that targets a diverse and inclusive Francophone audience. On June 28, 2021, Mr. Fergus' staff provided Mr. Felix with a letter signed by Mr. Fergus in his capacity as Member of Parliament. In a public notice dated September 21, 2022, the CRTC invited comments on Natif Incorporated's application, and on September 28, 2022, Natif Incorporated submitted the letter signed by Mr. Fergus to the CRTC. In this examination, I sought to determine whether Mr. Fergus had contravened Section 9 of the Act, which prohibits public office holders from using their position to seek to influence a decision of another person so as to improperly further another person's private interests. Given that the letter of support was intended to influence the decision of the CRTC so as to further the private interests of Natif Incorporated, I had to determine whether those interests were furthered improperly, and they were. Who is Natif Incorporated? This is Natif TV. They are a French channel that wanted to be included in the mandatory distribution of the cable package, the default cable package in Quebec. And with Fergus's help, they achieved that. Now, what's not known is, how did Mr. Fergus benefit? We don't know that at this time. One would think that there was some sort of benefit that he got. Maybe it's going to be votes. Maybe it is going to be campaign and election finances. Don't know. But given somebody as arrogant as this, and someone who has just recently been convicted of an ethics violation, pretty sure you could have done better, Liberals.
Yeah, I don't understand it. When a Liberal commits an ethics violation, they get promoted. Now think of you and your family and your friends and how hard we all work as Canadians. And when we work hard and do the right thing, we're punished by inflation, by rising interest rates, by soaring grocery prices.
Or by the unemployment line.
And it's all thanks to these Liberals.
So it's customary after the Speaker is elected for the party leaders to issue a statement. And Pierre took an opportunity, and I would have done the same thing.
J'aimerais reconnaître
I now recognize the leader of the official opposition.
Et félicitations
Thank you very much and congratulations, Mr. Speaker.
into. I know that you have strong enough arms for the job because I had the difficult task of dragging you all the way to that chair, and we thought for a moment that you'd changed your mind when you took a turn to congratulate one of our colleagues on this side. But it is an incredible achievement to serve in the role that Parliament has bestowed upon you. C'est un honneur pour tous et
It's an honor for everyone to serve here in the House of Commons. Every single one among us is proud to have the responsibility of working for about 100,000 people among the general public. Sometimes, however, we forget how it works. Sometimes we think the Prime Minister is in charge and the House of Commons is underneath and the people are on the bottom, but it's quite the opposite. The public is actually in charge of our democracy. We are their servants, and the government must serve parliamentarians.
Parliament was invented. And the reason that these floors and seats are green is because the first commoners met in fields. They were the peasants and the farmers who were tired of having their crops taxed away by an impossibly cruel crown. And they gathered to force King John to sign the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, which of course restrained the power of the crown. And today, we have a similar circumstance with a government that is excessively powerful and costly, that has overburdened the population, created unprecedented strain, particularly on middle class and working class peoples, who are now forced, in many cases, to live in tents, to lose their homes, who are skipping meals. We have 7 million who cannot afford food because of the inflationary taxes imposed upon that food by an overly greedy government. And so now more than ever, the role of Parliament in restraining the power of the Prime Minister is primordial. And we will continue to carry out that role proudly on the floor of this House of Commons, because we will always remember that we are servants and not masters of the day.
That was beautiful. That was very well executed.
Yeah, and you started to hear all of the grumbling from the Liberal side, because they're going to argue, listen, this is a special occasion. You know, it's not time to be partisan. You know, this is a time to celebrate somebody as Speaker. And I'm glad Pierre said what he said. You know why? Because this is not a time for Liberals to be patting each other on the back. You almost got another $20 there, Brian. It is not the time to be patting them on the back. It's time to get a new speaker elected and get back to work. People are suffering in this country, so stop treating it like a party and get to work. I love that Pierre recalled the history of how the House of Commons came to be in the first place. And for those of you that didn't know, I hope you learned something. Remember that. Remember why the seats and the carpet are green. That's a true story. He's not making that up. A bunch of commoners in England said, enough is enough. We're not doing any more crazy taxes from the crown. We've had enough. And they rebelled and said, listen, you're going to sign this, and you're going to sign this now. And so began Parliament. And Trudeau seems to forget. He works for us. He's not our boss. We are his boss. He is accountable to the Canadian people. First, he's accountable to Parliament, and Parliament is accountable to us. So I think that was a beautiful statement. I agree with Fox.
I think, yeah, the Liberals are going to twist it and say, oh, well, he shouldn't have said that. You know, this was supposed to be to celebrate the new speaker and blah, blah, blah. But I think it was the perfect opportunity because it's reminding everybody in that room, and especially the new speaker, that you are here for Canadians. Don't forget that.
Yeah. Why are you here in the first place? It is a privilege, not a right, to be selected by your constituents to represent them in the government. Represent them. And Pierre's not done.
And, Mr. Speaker, we will do it with common sense. Now, why is this important? I hear some members of the government who don't like the sound of the word common sense, and we can understand why they wouldn't. But isn't it interesting that this is called the House of Commons for a reason? Right. Common wisdom, our common resources, our common heritage, and our common future is determined by the people elected to serve in this place. And we must always do it with common sense. The common sense of the common people, united for our common home. Your home, my home, our house. Let's bring it home.
God, he's so clever.
He is. He is. We were going to show you Trudeau and sing, but you know what?
Nobody cares.
No, nobody wants to hear them. I don't want to hear them. I know you don't want to hear them. It was just virtue signaling and words I can't say on one of these videos. Maybe on the live stream. But seriously, Pierre's the only one talking common sense. That's all I hear. So let's get back to work, Parliament, because you have a lot of stuff to do. And you have upcoming motion to consider, which is the removal of the carbon tax. I am so looking forward to how this is going to go. Don't get your hopes up. It isn't going to pass. But I want to see what happens with those Atlantic premiers.
And it's going to show Canadians exactly who their member of parliament is working for.